Imagine for a moment that the very words of Jesus, the man who changed the course of history, were not fully given to you. Imagine that hidden from you, sealed away by powerful hands, there existed a book that contained the unfiltered wisdom of the teacher himself, a wisdom that could shatter illusions, challenge institutions, and liberate souls. What if I told you that such a book once circulated among the early followers of Christ, but was later silenced, buried, and forbidden by the church itself? What if the version of Christianity you know today was carefully shaped by what was left out, not only by what was preserved? Stay with me, because the revelations in this journey will not only challenge your understanding of faith, but may transform the way you see spirituality, history, and even your own inner search for truth. And I promise, the final revelation we will uncover together is the most powerful of all. Before we begin to uncover this mystery, I want to invite you to take part in this journey actively. Subscribe to this channel, leave your like, and share this video with others who are ready to look deeper into the mysteries hidden beneath the surface of history. Leave your thoughts in the comments as we explore, because the questions I will raise here are not only about dusty manuscripts, they are about your life, your soul, and the truths that may have been kept from you. Now let us step into the shadows of history. In the centuries following the death of Jesus, many writings circulated among his disciples and their communities. These writings contained sayings, parables, and profound insights attributed directly to him. Some of these were familiar and eventually chosen to be part of the New Testament. Others, however, were excluded, declared heretical, suppressed, or outright destroyed. Among these texts, one stands out as both mysterious and deeply unsettling to the established order, the Gospel of Thomas. This book, discovered in the sands of Nag Hammadi, Egypt, in 1945, stunned scholars around the world. It did not present Jesus as a distant divine figure, accessible only through the institution of the church. Instead, it presented him as a teacher of inner awakening, a revealer of hidden knowledge, someone who told his followers that the kingdom of God was not in the sky, not in buildings, not confined to rituals, but within them, within the human heart and mind. Think of the radical implications of that message. If the kingdom is within you, then no institution, no priest, no external authority holds the keys to your salvation. You yourself do. It is no wonder, then, that such a text would be considered dangerous to the guardians of orthodoxy. The Gospel of Thomas is not a narrative of miracles or external events. It is a collection of sayings, direct and unfiltered, often resembling cryptic riddles, designed to provoke insight in the listener. For example, one of the most striking passages has Jesus say, "If you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you." Reflect on this for a moment. What could it mean? Could it be that the true path of salvation is not in blindly following authority, but in uncovering the divine spark hidden within each of us? The Church, in its effort to unify doctrine and establish itself as the sole authority of truth, could not allow multiple voices of Jesus to circulate. It was in the councils of the 4th century, particularly under the shadow of Emperor Constantine, that the New Testament canon was solidified. Books like Thomas were not only left out, but actively condemned. The reasoning was clear. Unity of faith required control of narrative. Divergent voices threatened to fragment the growing institution. And so, what may have been the raw teachings of Jesus himself were locked away, hidden, and branded heresy. But let us ask the question together. If these teachings had been preserved and embraced, what would Christianity look like today? Would it be an institution of rituals and intermediaries, or would it be a living path of inner discovery? Would its followers seek salvation not through dogma, but through awakening to the divine presence already within them? And most importantly, what does it mean for you, sitting here now, to realize that perhaps the truest words of Jesus are not the ones preached from pulpits, but the ones that were silenced? Think deeply about this. Comment below what you feel when you imagine an alternate Christianity, one not ruled by hierarchy and external authority, but by direct connection with the divine inside you. Could it be that the most revolutionary act of faith is to trust your own inner light? This is only the beginning of our exploration. In the next part, we will go deeper into the actual content of this forbidden book. We will examine specific sayings of Jesus preserved in the Gospel of Thomas and compare them with the words in the Bible you are familiar with. We will see how they echo ancient wisdom traditions and why their message is not only spiritual, but profoundly transformative. Stay with me, because the deeper we go, the more astonishing the revelations will become. And remember, the final one is the most powerful of all. Excellent. Let's move forward. Below is part 2 of the script, 5,000 characters. I will stop at the end again and wait for your approval before moving on to part 3. When the Gospel of Thomas was unearthed in Nag Hammadi, many scholars could hardly believe their eyes. Here, in the desert, lay a text hidden for nearly 2,000 years, preserved in secret, as though waiting for a moment in history when humanity would be ready to read it again. Written in Coptic, this text was a translation from even earlier Greek versions, suggesting that its roots reached deep into the very first generations of Jesus' followers. Unlike the familiar Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, this was not a narrative of his birth, miracles, crucifixion, or resurrection. It was something entirely different, a book of pure sayings, one after another, as though Jesus had left behind a notebook filled only with his most essential teachings. Why is this so significant? Because it forces us to confront a question that shakes the foundations of traditional Christianity. What if the true power of Jesus' message was never meant to be about external rituals, but about awakening consciousness? What if he came not to build an institution, but to ignite the fire of inner knowledge within every individual? Think about this carefully, because if this is true, it changes everything. Let us look closely at some of these sayings. One of the most famous passages from the Gospel of Thomas records Jesus saying, "The kingdom of God is inside you and all around you, not in buildings of wood and stone. Split a piece of wood, and I am there. Lift the stone, and you will find me." These words resonate with a radical simplicity. They deny the necessity of temples, rituals, and hierarchies. They suggest that the sacred is not locked in distant heavens, but infused in the fabric of reality itself, waiting to be discovered by those who open their eyes. Now compare this to the institutional message of the Church, which insists that the faithful must come to its altars, follow its sacraments, and obey its intermediaries in order to find salvation. Can you see the difference? One offers liberation, the other control. One empowers you, the other binds you. Is it any wonder that a text like this was branded dangerous, even heretical? Another saying, equally striking, states, "When you come to know yourselves, then you will become known, and you will realize that it is you who are the children of the living Father." Notice what this reveals. Salvation, enlightenment, union with the divine, it is not presented here as something granted by an external savior, but as an awakening to one's own divine nature. In other words, Jesus points not outside of you, but within you. Could this be the reason that institutions that thrive on authority would silence such a message? Throughout history, mystics and seekers across traditions have echoed similar truths. The Sufi poet Rumi wrote, "The truth was a mirror in the hands of God. It fell and broke into pieces. Everybody took a piece, and they looked at it and thought they had the truth." The Gospel of Thomas, like the wisdom of the mystics, reminds us that truth is not monopolized by any one authority. It is reflected within the soul of each individual. But let us not romanticize too quickly. Some scholars, like Elaine Pagels and Marvin Meyer, have cautioned us to read these texts carefully. They argue that the Gospel of Thomas may not be a straightforward manual of Jesus' words, but a mystical reinterpretation by early followers. Yet even if that were the case, ask yourself, what does it reveal about the diversity of voices that surrounded Jesus in the earliest centuries? Christianity was not always a single, monolithic faith. It was alive with competing interpretations, dynamic debates, and multiple visions of what his message meant. The fact that one interpretation prevailed, the one that led to the Church as we know it, does not mean it was the only or even the truest one. Reflect for a moment. What if your understanding of God has been narrowed by centuries of censorship? What if the path to divine knowledge is not about submission to authority, but about listening to the voice of truth already whispering within you? How would your life change if you truly believed that you carry within yourself the light that Jesus pointed toward? Leave your reflections in the comments. I want to know, do you believe the kingdom is within, as Thomas records, or do you believe it must be mediated through external authority? This is not just an academic question. It is the question that could define the entire direction of your spiritual journey. There is more. Some passages in Thomas reveal Jesus as a kind of Zen master, breaking apart the conventional logic of his listeners to push them into deeper awareness. For example, he says, "When you make the two into one, when you make the inner like the outer and the upper like the lower, and when you make male and female into a single one, then you will enter the kingdom." These words are puzzling, yet profoundly symbolic. They point to integration, unity, the overcoming of duality. They invite us to transcend division and discover the wholeness that lies beneath apparent opposites. This is not dogma. It is direct spiritual experience. Now pause and consider, if such teachings had been at the center of Christianity, how different would the last 2,000 years have been? Would wars have been fought in the name of religion? Would power structures have been built upon fear and obedience? Or would humanity have walked a path of self-knowledge, inner peace, and unity? These are not idle speculations. They are reflections that can awaken you to see how history has shaped your spiritual inheritance. And this is only the surface. In the next part, we will dive deeper into the hidden layers of meaning in these sayings, connecting them with other ancient traditions, from Egyptian mysticism to Platonic philosophy, and uncover how the Gospel of Thomas reveals a stream of wisdom that transcends Christianity itself. We will see why the Church feared it, why mystics revered it, and why its message might still ignite the deepest transformation in your life today. And remember, the final revelation will be the most powerful one of all. As we journey deeper into the Gospel of Thomas, we begin to see how its vision was not isolated, but part of a broader current of ancient wisdom that stretched far beyond Christianity. Imagine the ancient Mediterranean world, Egypt with its mystery schools, Greece with its philosophers, Mesopotamia with its traditions, and Israel with its prophets. This was not a vacuum, but a crossroads where ideas flowed and intermingled. Against this backdrop, the teachings attributed to Jesus in Thomas appear not only revolutionary, but also profoundly connected with the spiritual currents of the time. Let us consider again the striking saying, "When you know yourselves, then you will be known, and you will understand that you are children of the living Father." These words echo the inscription once carved into the stone of the temple at Delphi in Greece, "Know thyself." The Greek philosophers believed that self-knowledge was the key to wisdom and to union with the divine. The Egyptians, through their rituals of initiation, also sought to awaken the individual to the eternal soul within. And here we find Jesus, speaking in the same universal language, reminding his disciples that salvation is not in blind obedience, but in awakening to what already dwells within them. Now reflect on this. Could it be that the reason Thomas's gospel was silenced was not simply because it contradicted the church's power, but because it revealed that the wisdom of Jesus was not meant to be confined to one tradition, that his voice belonged not only to Christianity, but to humanity as a whole? If this is true, then his words were not just a message for a sect, but a universal key that could unlock the mysteries of existence for anyone willing to listen. Consider another saying, "If those who lead you say to you, 'See, the kingdom is in the sky,' then the birds of the sky will precede you. If they say to you, 'It is in the sea,' then the fish will precede you. Rather, the kingdom is inside of you, and it is outside of you." This teaching dissolves all illusions of external pursuit. It strips away the search for salvation in distant heavens, promising instead that the divine permeates everything. Compare this to the Egyptian concept of ma'at, the principle of balance and cosmic order that was not separate from life, but infused in every action, every relationship, every breath. Can you see how the echoes align? The church of later centuries could not accept such radical freedom. To tell people that the divine was within them was to render priests unnecessary, temples redundant, and dogma powerless. Instead, it sought to regulate access to the sacred, placing itself as the mediator between God and humanity. In this light, the Gospel of Thomas was not only a book, it was a threat, a challenge to the very foundation of authority. Scholars like Elaine Pagels have pointed out that the diversity of early Christian texts reveals a struggle of voices, some emphasizing institutional structure, others emphasizing mystical experience. The Gospel of Thomas stands firmly in the second category, calling people not to kneel before an altar, but to awaken from within. Ask yourself, which voice do you hear more clearly in your own heart? the voice that demands obedience, or the one that whispers of freedom and inner light. Another passage, mysterious and haunting, says, "Blessed is the one who came into being before coming into being." On the surface, this sounds cryptic, even absurd. But pause and reflect. Could it be pointing to the eternal essence of the soul, the part of you that existed before you were born, the spark of the divine that transcends time? In mystical traditions across the world, from Hinduism to Neoplatonism, we find the same teaching, that the soul is eternal, that your true essence is beyond the limits of this temporary form. In Thomas, Jesus seems to be pointing his followers to this timeless reality, inviting them to recognize their true identity not as fleeting bodies, but as eternal children of the divine. And yet how different this is from the way mainstream Christianity evolved. Instead of teaching you to discover the eternal soul within, it taught you to fear eternal punishment, to depend on sacraments for salvation, to obey authority without question. Do you see the difference? One liberates, the other enslaves. One ignites awakening, the other enforces conformity. Which path speaks to your deepest longing? Think about how different the world could be if humanity had embraced this inner path 2,000 years ago. Would wars of religion still have scarred the earth? Would inquisitions have burned seekers at the stake? Or would we have cultivated a civilization of inner exploration, compassion, and universal wisdom? These are not just historical speculations. They are questions that touch the heart of who we are today. For if the kingdom is within, then the power to change the world begins not with external authorities, but with the awakening of each soul. I invite you to reflect and share in the comments. What do you feel when you hear that the soul is eternal, that you existed before you were born, and that your true self is one with the divine? Does this fill you with fear or with liberation? And here is where the mystery deepens even further. The Gospel of Thomas does not simply echo ancient wisdom, it also anticipates truths that resonate with modern seekers, even with insights from psychology and quantum physics. When Jesus says that the kingdom is both inside and outside, could this not align with the modern realization that consciousness and reality are interwoven, that the observer and the observed cannot be separated? These questions stretch the mind, but they also awaken the spirit. In the next part, we will arrive at the most astonishing revelation of all. We will uncover the hidden thread that ties these forbidden words of Jesus to a deeper understanding of human destiny, and why this book, silenced for centuries, may hold the key to your own transformation today. This final truth is the most powerful, and once you hear it, you may never see life or yourself the same way again. Up until now, we have uncovered how the Gospel of Thomas challenges institutional religion, how it calls us to awaken to the divine within, and how it resonates with ancient wisdom traditions from across the world. But now we must face the final and most powerful truth contained in this forbidden book, the truth that explains not only why it was silenced, but why it is so vital for us today. Among the sayings of Jesus preserved in Thomas, there is one that stands above all others in its power to awaken and transform. It is brief, almost hidden among the collection, yet it shines like a key capable of unlocking the entire mystery. Jesus says, "If you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you." Pause for a moment and let these words sink in. What could it mean? Here, salvation is not described as obedience to laws or participation in rituals. It is not about waiting for some future reward in heaven. It is about a decision, a responsibility that lies within you. You carry within yourself the seed of your own salvation, the treasure of your own awakening. But if you fail to bring it forth, if you bury it beneath ignorance, fear, and conformity, then that same inner force will turn against you, becoming destruction. This is not a doctrine of blind belief. It is a call to awakening, a call to responsibility, a call to courage. Think of the courage it takes to truly live these words. To bring forth what is within you means to uncover your authentic self, to awaken the divine spark hidden beneath layers of conditioning. It means to speak your truth, to follow your calling, to refuse to live as a shadow of what society or institutions demand. And perhaps this is why the church feared these words above all. Because a person who has brought forth what is within them cannot be controlled. They cannot be manipulated by fear. They do not need intermediaries. They are free. Throughout history, mystics and visionaries have lived this truth, often at great cost. Meister Eckhart, the Christian mystic of the Middle Ages, said, "The eye with which I see God is the same eye with which God sees me." For such words, he was persecuted. The Sufi mystic Al-Hallaj declared, "I am the truth," and for this he was executed. The Gospel of Thomas places this radical freedom not in the hands of a few saints, but in the destiny of every human being. Do you see why this was considered dangerous? Now let us tie this truth to your own life. What is within you that you have not yet brought forth? What gifts, what wisdom, what light are you hiding from yourself and from the world? Could it be that your struggles, your inner conflicts, even your suffering, arise from this failure to bring forth what is already there? Imagine how different your life could be if you allowed the deepest truth within you to shine without fear. This is the essence of the Gospel of Thomas. This is the true word of Jesus, silenced by power, but still alive for those who have ears to hear. And here lies the final revelation. Salvation is not something given to you from outside. It is not in the hands of priests, nor in the decrees of institutions, nor in distant heavens. Salvation is the awakening of what you already are. You are not broken, waiting to be fixed. You are not condemned, waiting to be forgiven. You are divine in essence, waiting to be remembered. The greatest deception was to make you forget this truth, to convince you that you are powerless without external authority. The greatest liberation is to remember who you are. Now, think of the implications. If humanity as a whole were to awaken to this truth, the structures of domination would collapse. Wars fought over dogma would lose their power. Fear of eternal punishment would dissolve. Entire empires built on obedience would fall away. And what would remain? A humanity rooted in self-knowledge, compassion, and direct experience of the divine. This is why the Gospel of Thomas was banned by the Church, and this is why it still matters today. Ask yourself now with all honesty, do you dare to bring forth what is within you? Do you dare to walk the path of inner awakening that Jesus pointed toward, even if it challenges the beliefs you were taught since childhood? Do you dare to step into freedom? Share your thoughts in the comments. This is not a question to be answered casually. It is the very question of your life. And as we close, remember the promise I made at the beginning. I told you that the final revelation would be the most powerful, and here it is. The true words of Jesus, hidden and forbidden for centuries, tell you that the kingdom of God is not somewhere else, not in temples, not in priests, not even in heaven above. It is within you, always has been, always will be. The greatest secret is not out there in the world. It is you. So the choice lies before you now. To live asleep, dependent, bound by fear, or to awaken, to bring forth what is within you, and to realize that you are already a child of the living Father. This is not merely history. This is not merely philosophy. This is your destiny. If this message has touched you, share it. Let others discover the truth that was buried, the truth that can still change the world. Subscribe to this channel so we can continue to journey into these mysteries together. And remember always, you are not seeking the light, you are the light. Thanks for looking.